Hello, everybody, and welcome to my podcast, PepTalks. I am your hostess, Kat Frisbee, aka Pepper, and this is an expand episode. In these expand episodes, I'm interviewing people from all walks of life about their passions, hobbies, careers, interests, all kinds of things to dive a little bit deeper into things that we all may not know very much about. So I'm hoping that in these episodes, I can help inspire you to explore more in the world and expand your mind. Here we go. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Pep Talks. You are watching Pep Talks Expand. I am your hostess, Kat Frisbee, aka Pepper, and I am here today with guest star Mike Denman, photographer, author, filmmaker, advertising scientist, and much, much more. Hi, Mike.
Hey, Kat, thank you for having me on. I absolutely appreciate this.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
You got so much knowledge. I can't wait for you to spill it all out today, at least on this topic.
I'm very excited, yeah, and I think that, it's good to have expansive conversations around a lot of these things, because some people are like, yeah, we just have these things in our lives, you don't really think about them or how to use them. In some ways, we're like, we just trust that the apps are going to work for us and all the people are going to do the things, and it's like it gets a little bit more complicated, and having a baseline understanding of some of these things helps us navigate stuff. So yeah. It'll be
Yeah, absolutely. That said, this is on the topic of how to improve your social media presence and organize it behind the scenes. There are so many kinds of social media. We've got Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, TikTok, Tumblr, Reddit, Discord, WhatsApp, Telegram, Signal, YouTube, LinkedIn. I'm sure that you could keep going, couldn't you?
There's so many, and new ones pop up all the time, and I think the weird thing is any one of these is not necessarily a guarantee. There was also MySpace at one point. People enjoyed that, and then it was gone.
Yeah, right.
So there's some things that will go in and out of the popularity and also functionality. Other companies like to try and compete with some companies, like when Facebook and Instagram started doing Reels and all that, they were competing with Snapchat. Now there's all these different elements of that people are like, well, I really like this for this and this for this. And they then put their content in different places, and it all maps over. But at the end of the day, it's like, are they really competing or just giving more people other avenues which they can communicate?
Yeah, and I have a 13-year-old son, and every time that he sees me on Facebook, he just whispers under his breath, old. And I'm like, really? Because I feel like I'm going to forever use Facebook. And, it might fade out. Who has any idea? But that's another topic, though, is what to use and when to use it or when to avoid it.
Right. And things like where you're trying to reach a certain audience, the demographics of different platforms are meaningful and valuable to know about. So people who are on Facebook are oftentimes 30 and up now. And it's something that as older generations are adopting the platform, they're communicating with people, long lost friends, and that becomes almost like a white pages kind of thing, where you're like, oh, I have a Rolodex, and this is where I connect with people and how I have that kind of relationship. And it's not as much as watching other people's lives as so much as connecting and having a part of that community. And Facebook's really centric for groups and some of those mentalities right now. Facebook made it really hard for business pages. In 2018, they got a $5 billion fine for how their advertising practices were unethical and discriminatory. So there's a whole lot of things that they changed, and in doing so, they changed how people use Facebook. And so businesses have to advertise and pay to advertise in order to reach people, and they have to spend money to be able to be on people's feeds. Whereas before, you could have an organic, I'm going to post a bunch of stuff and people will find it eventually. People will see it if they go to your page. If you're not promoting your page on something or everything, or even your email signature, you're not going to have people really going to it unless they're seeking it out actively, or you're referencing it and having them go there. And so I use the Facebook pages as almost like digital billboards or digital business cards, where it's all the pertinent information people need and where they can access what you want them to go to. And so it's helpful, it's relevant, and I don't know how long it'll be around, but at least for right now, while Meta's doing its thing, it's going to be for a little while, and then it'll adapt and change, and some other thing will come up and try to fight it. Facebook just released Threads, which is kind of like their Twitter killer, and it was something that people were like, all right, cool, let's get into it. But you don't use hashtags on there, and it's how do you find the conversations? And so some of these things, the functionality isn't necessarily helpful. And so some of them are like, broadcast. But when you broadcast all the time, that's also a derivative. So you have to find where people are going to actually listen to you. And then that community-centric thing is like, that's why people like Discord and Telegram and Signal, because those are like communication apps, like instant messaging and connecting with friends. And so like you can actually have live conversations, stream video with each other, all sorts of little nuances of how they share time together digitally. And since the pandemic, we all got accustomed to viewing things through screens. And it was like, okay, how do we interact? Well, we were afraid before to really adopt it. Now everyone's like, I can own that. I can video chat with somebody, and I'm comfortable with that. And I don't have to do my hair sometimes or look whatever I need to look like. And we look like crazy stuff over the course of the past few years, but we all just kind of like got used to looking at ourselves on camera. And that was a big change. And so that's why people are like, I can do a lot more of these different platforms that have video-centric elements. It's beautiful. Yeah. So it's all in what intentions you have for it, where you want to go with it, and how you want to use it, and what you're using it for.
Yeah, and you touched on something I think is really important. I appreciate that we went through a time period with social media where most of us had to get comfortable with it, at least to a certain degree, because I don't feel like it's going anywhere. Like it's not going to leave us. We're always going to have this, and in fact, computers are going to integrate even more into our lives, I feel like.
Elon Musk is planting chips into people's brains right now that allow them to neurologically interact with computers and technology. So there's stuff that we're going to see it go different places, and it's going to be weird. We're going to be like, what ethics is this? And there's going to be a lot of different conversations around that stuff. There's a lot of also research going on in terms of the impact of social media on mental health and psychology as to how people are impacted by some of these elements, cyberbullying and all these other pieces in terms of like insecurities and when to allow kids on it. There's certain countries that are banning kids from being able to access social media because of the detrimental impact to their ability to communicate, effectively be humans, and there's all these things that I think that people just need to be reminded on how to do interactions. And it's not just like one area, it's a larger conversation around those things. Yeah,
it's easy to get consumed in this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think everybody could see that and understand that. But part of the communication today is really how to use things so that you're not being consumed by it. So for instance, you don't get confused about how to even create stuff or how to store it or how to make it or why you're making it or, who to give it to, who not to give it to maybe. I remember back when people were posting their free days on Facebook because they called in sick at work and then everybody would get caught. So, we have our process of using it right and maybe not so right.
But with a lot of that, I think it's really important to touch base on what we're presenting to the world and who we're showing us to be. And I think the lack of anonymity with some of these things and the inability for you to really get away with having a free day without people knowing about it if you do stuff, and even as you have tracking capabilities, or Facebook did this thing where it's like friends nearby kind of thing, where it's like it was a weird thing for a little while. They cut some of those things out because of privacy, but it's like there's a lot of things that evolve and grow, and really like what you do online and all that, it's like that's how people perceive you. It's how you are presenting yourself to the world, and so that's also a part of these conversations.
Yeah, I recently found a few different social media stars, if you will, that have figured out ways of creating video or shorts or reels or whatever online where they're just faceless. So, maybe it's an action that they're doing, or maybe literally you just never see their face, like back in the days of the Muppets when they'd have people walking through, actual humans. But this gets into a really good topic. So, talking about branding.
Branding.
Yeah.
So with brand in general, about who we are, what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we communicate what we're doing, and what it looks like for people. So all these things are brand. Like your brand, obviously you've got that solid piece, Pepper, all the stuff, right? And even my brand is like this mutable, growing thing. Like I have a company called Better Than Awesome, and I have built all these things into that brand that I'm like, I don't really pay that much attention to some of the consistency of the diverse things I've done. I've just kind of put it under an umbrella. And so there's things about brand messaging, the tone, the look, the color, all these things that you have to consider when you're starting to go out into the world, and you have to see if people respond to it and how it's palatable to them, or if it's overwhelming, or if it just misses the spot.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are scared to get started because they may be rejected, or maybe even worse, they don't get seen at all. I don't know which one would be worse, but I feel personally, especially having to dive into this kind of stuff myself, like just do it, just get started. We're not actually emotionally designed as human beings to be able to hold on to all of the different input from so many strangers that can come from social media. And that said, thinking about that, just do it. Just follow through with it. And if you want to take anything to heart, maybe it's your friends or your close family, and that's it. But just doing it is the first step. Get one foot out there.
There's a book I read, I forget the gentleman's name, I think it's like the Millionaire Mindset, and he has this really cool concept that I really love. It's ready, fire, aim. And the whole idea about having a minimum viable product, or some sort of like rough idea. Like if you have an idea for some sort of thing, a brand, you don't need to have that brand name figured out. You can just get a name and evolve it. Get a website, get a platform name, a username, whatever it is. And as you get that, you start really evolving what that is. You help people understand who you are, and then you can evolve the name, and your brand can develop and change. Logos and companies change their names often. And it's an evolutionary process. And so just like with businesses, if you look at like even AT&T, right, with the baby bells and all those different things and it broke up because it was a monopoly back in the day, because they also owned all the infrastructure for the TV stations and everything was connected, and it was scary for the government. So like, no. And then it split into all these little tiny brands that had little bell versions of things. And then ultimately, as it evolved and grew back into where it's at, it's like this thing that is only taking over all these other communication platform things and still becoming this huge monopoly again. So it's like, as it evolves and people evolve, know that failure happens. And I think Tony Robbins says, fail fast, fail often, fail frequently, and enjoy the failure process and learn and grow. And so like, if you are not failing, you're not succeeding. And the failure is going to be a part of the process. Like Edison, who had a bunch of people helping him make the light bulb, right? They learned 1,000 ways not to make the light bulb. And so all these things that they can discover, it's like you have to even listen to the Japanese proverbs, like, you fall down 8 times, you get up 9 times. And so like these things are so important with how we are supposed to just move through things. And I have a beautiful, wonderful friend, Dr. Adrienne McKeon, and she has this great book called Spark Genius. It talks about the processivity, so the activity of process, and the concept of moving forward and having these things. And regardless of the outcome or the results, you're still progressing. You're using your process to activate a procedure that you then complete something that might take years to complete. She was working in video games, where she kind of came up with this idea of supporting creatives and helping them with these things where they'd get burnt out, but then she's like, all right, let me help you just with the process, and then they help get the things done. And it's like all these things that we have to just be okay with failure and trying. And it's scary and it's terrifying. And people are always afraid of being like anyone looking at them in a bad light. And it's like, if you have something that you're like, oh, well, that was really terrible, you can always take it off the internet. You can always take it down. Sometimes it gets syndicated and you can't take it off the internet, but then you have to be like, well, that's where I was at that time, but look what I'm doing now, and it's so much different. And people will find the things you're doing and even see the authenticity or the genuine attention of what you're trying to put towards, and then the intentionality of where you're going, and they can see the development of things. People's YouTube channels all start really like, bare bones, and then they get followings, and then they can, I can afford a different lighting system, I can afford a different camera setup, and then it starts looking at a different aesthetic. And they start looking like, I want to put like LEDs with different colors around my background. So they start evolving their brand and evolving their color choices and all these things. They're very organic. And it's just because of access, time, and then their capabilities of doing the thing and figuring it out. On the branding element, it's like when people start thinking about like what they're doing on the web, how they look, that's part of it. The way in which you speak, say, write, the font you use, the colors associated to it, the look and feel of the environment people go into, having consistency across all of it. So like if you've got like a profile photo and color palette, having those map out to your social platforms, map out to your website pieces, map out to your business cards. All those things help people know what to expect from you. And so, like, as you evolve those things and as you grow who you are, like, yeah, don't be afraid of ordering different business cards. And don't be afraid of ordering, like, changing your website themes. Like, these websites, we can change themes like you were just changing outfits. And so, like, there's all these things that you can switch around that can help you discover what it is. And it's oftentimes so subjective. And it's, like, really what you like. But also, like, the world out there, people like a lot of different things from what you like. And you might not know what people are going to resonate with until you try a bunch of stuff. And one of my favorite things to do is spaghetti test, where you do a bunch of stuff. And you throw it on the wall and see what sticks. It's like spaghetti, when you're cooking spaghetti, right? It's like to tell when it's actually done. So like when I spaghetti test advertising, or I run a marketing research campaign on which images work for people, or which ones click more, or what phrases and what messaging, or what things people say to be able to get them to you to click. Because that's the whole thing. You're vying for someone's attention. You're like, how do I get you to click on my stuff? You have to stop them from scrolling. Do something different. For a little while there was an interesting social media thing where you'd have like, an aesthetic of like a social media post. And then people are like, all right, I'm going to take this post, I'm going to design a video that has that post as a thing, and I'm going to make a video inside of it that's going to reach out from the post. And it's going to crawl out into the page, and it like gets into people's feeds where they're like, what is this weird thing that's totally like not part of the normal aesthetic that I'd experienced? They're breaking the mold, breaking the stigma, breaking the structure, breaking the monotony, all these things that help just grab people's attention. And so that is another part of this gamble where you're like, I don't know what's going to work until you try a bunch of stuff, fail a bunch of times, and that one or two things like, I'm going to do that more. Seems like people really resonated with this. And it's like if you look at the data and you do ads, it's like a click-through rate. Every one of those types of things, I'm like, I get excited when things are like, oh, there's a higher percentage of clicking through on these things. What if I reiterate and do these things differently? That brings all the boys to the yard. And so like all of this stuff that we really want to like focus on, it's like iterative process, and failure is a part of it. But when I like run an ad campaign, I'll run like thousands of ads that algorithmically get created with all the content I put into it that Facebook figures out what people look at. Instagram's like, oh, these people stop scrolling on these things. And I notice by the data, and then I can make data-driven decisions to help me cultivate and curate and craft what the next piece is that I can try out. It's wild. Doing a video and audience retention, what they're paying attention to, it's like, that's also nuts. Putting heat maps on people's websites so you can see where their mouse is going, where they click on things, and like, I'm gonna hover over that for a little while. Like, wow, they spent 5 minutes looking at these photo sets. I should make these photo sets more important. So there's very much a lot of information. You can gain so much knowledge from just like paying attention and accessing this stuff, but you have to try something, to put something out there to see what people interact with. And then you can do the more.
And you just touched base on a lot of different things that for me I would have 1,000 questions for, but Mike has actually broken it down into different kinds of mechanisms and how to implement them. So if you had a whole bunch of questions about how do I do that, or where do I do that, or what do I use, that's what we're going towards. Go ahead, Mike, take the floor.
So a lot of the mechanisms, it's really at the first and foremost is the planning stage. And we really think about like what the idea is that we're doing. And so if we take, PepTalks and the expands concept in general, like when we first started talking about this, and the idea is like, okay, this is where you're at, and you're starting to grow and adapt and build it out there. But like a lot of the planning is to like, what am I talking about? Who am I talking to? What am I going to say? What are people going to gain from this?
Right.
How do I really want to help people?
I use the who, what, when, where, why, how method pretty much every time.
It's super important. And I think that like when we think about content, right, it's like there's so much content going up on YouTube. It's like, I forget the statistic, but every hour, every minute on YouTube, there's hours being uploaded. It's crazy.
Wow.
It's crazy.
I had to think about that for a second.
It's like, it's this really expansive thing when you think about like the amount of stuff that people could watch. And I see this with a lot of TikTok and Instagram, and where it's like there's so much that you can consume. But there's also so much you can create. And there's so many niche pockets of where people are paying attention and what they want to pay attention to. And this is really where the magic happens. The community is where the magic really happens, because you find these communities. Like I have a short-term rental advertising business, stradvertising.com, and it's something that I got into as a real estate investor in helping people manage how to get more bookings on their like Airbnbs. And it was something I was like, well, I'm doing this, and I'm doing ads, and this works for me. And I also have baseline of digital marketing, so I'm like, I've got a solid idea of it. I published books on the topic, so I'm like, this is a whole thing. I'm like, we just have to start doing stuff. And you do these things. You have a method for like how you implement stuff. You follow, like, share, that kind of thing, but with intention. You can't just randomly comment on someone's thing and be expecting like they're going to work. You're going to look like one of those bots that people have paid people to then go around, oh, come check out my page. Oh, hey, this would be great. I love this thing. You should submit it to this. And they're trying to get people to pay them money to share on their millions of subscribers things. And it's all this like racket. It's exhausting. I barely look at Instagram for most of these things. And it's just one of those things I'm like, all right. But if you post reels and stories, people actually watch those. It's not just some sort of algorithm that's looking at those and interacting with those. That's like real people interacting with this stuff. And you can find the topics that you're really keen on and really interested in. And you can find the communities that really like need that topic, or you can discuss it with them. And so you can grow things even as small as like a couple hundred people and have a very genuine connection with everyone on those things. I have a buddy named Luke. He's like a fitness guy, and he's got this amazing Facebook group where he's just like, hey, how do we get you to be the best you yourself? And yeah, he sells a fitness program and a nutrition program and some of those things, but he's just really just like, hey, I see you. I want to help you. And it's those genuine people who are like, yeah, they're doing these methods, they're selling stuff, but everyone's got to turn the lights on, keep their homes, right? Keep their families fed. But at the same time, like if they can do something that's really powerful and helpful, like they have to start from somewhere. And when you plan and go through a lot of the elements of like, okay, what am I going to make? What topics am I going to talk about? Content, what the content is, what it looks like. There's all these variables. And so like really at the base level, it's like pen and paper. I write out a mind map and I bullet point different topics off of a conversation piece, and then I can expand upon those even further. I use digital tools like Mira is really cool for like a digital mind map. You can also like collaborate with people electronically, and you have this like wide space which you can add all these things to. It's beautiful. Beautiful.
Like using thought bubbles on a scratch pad, and they expand in a bunch of different directions.
Yeah. And so like Microsoft has this cool thing called like OneNote that you can do collaborations on. Apple's got some things as well. And so like there's really cool apps out there. And I recommend just try a bunch of weird stuff and figure out like what things might be helpful for you and which apps you like. Like I really like this app called Trello by Jira. It's a Confluence-owned company they had acquired. And it's just like this thing where you can lists, checklists, images. I use it for content approval with people, and I have like this like little thing where like, let's talk about what this is and the topics we're going to have and who we want to talk to and all these things, and you can just categorize your thoughts. Building out some sort of thing on paper is what works for me. Building out digital stuff works for other people. I take paper and then I go into the digital realm. I don't really just start in the digital realm, because sometimes if I write it by hand, I'll remember it very easily because of kinesthetics and our muscle memory. If I type it, I'm not as keen to remember exactly what I wrote or anything like that. Even on my phone, I use a swipe keyboard, so that way I'm really kind of like, I'm swiping the word and I have the QWERTY keyboard mapped out, and so I'm like, I have an idea of what I write in my phone and I can remember it, but ultimately it's not really like anything you want to like trust your memory on things, because you're trying to think about so many things. Having a registry or a repository where you just list stuff out, and it's okay. This is like the spitballing, like the brainstorming things where you're like, I don't know, this idea going to work? Like I had my human design run a few years ago, and it's like the human design thing is like astrology, astronomy, or your humanality. It's like all this kind of stuff, and I'm a generator, what I found. And so like I generate ideas after ideas after ideas. When people share ideas, I'm like, oh, you can do this. I oftentimes like to ask people like, what are your dreams and how you want to go with this? And then usually they have like an idea of what they want. I'm like, well, all right, cool, you can start here. And then this is how you map out what you're thinking about, what the topic's going to be, where you're going to go with that. And then you can use tools like trends.google.com, which is wildly helpful for any kind of digital stuff, especially search engine optimization. I've run SEO agencies before and digital marketing agencies. And so like some of these tools are like, they're used to capture your attention on the internet anyways. So if you as a creator of things are going to use them to help people find out what you are talking about and the related topics to it, you can find easily through Google, and it's the search engine, it's available, it's free. You can dive into like where people are talking about these things, what parts of the country. I use that for advertising to find which pockets I need to advertise certain things. It's a whole wide thing that like, it really is like what you're saying, and then who you're saying it to, and then really the how you're saying it. So that's like the tone and messaging and some of those pieces. You have to also plan that and practice that. So if you have an idea of like, I want to use all these high level words, I'm going to be speaking so efficaciously about the ways in which I interact with the world, and then you're like, oh wait, am I going to miss out on people being able to understand me or really communicate with me? How do I get this to a level where it's like, it's easily palatable? Like newspapers are written for an 8th grade or below level, so that way people can interact with them as the masses. New Yorker and some of the magazines, obviously they have like higher echelons, and there's like, 50-cent words in there, and you might have to like, I'm going to Google that word. I don't know what that is. One of my favorite things is on the phone where you're like reading something and you can just like highlight the actual word and then look it up, because I'm like, I don't know. I love words. I have a very large lexicon, but it's because I've studied a lot of words. I tried to teach myself Latin in high school. It was really hard when no one speaks Latin. It's a bizarre thing, but it gives you a foundation of understanding of languages that are built upon systems in the past. And so there's all these elements of that go into then planning and what they are and how you say it. And so every one of these mechanisms that you can choose, it really is like, okay, starts really with not being on a platform, not being on one of these things yet. It's like, what is the mechanism of you deciding what you're going to say? And that will then allow you to start really mapping out how you do everything.
Cool. So that is a beautiful explanation of the what. What is it that you're doing? What? So next would be your computers and tech. So there's so much involved. And I think that I gathered from you that you pretty much learned code before English, right?
So I started working on computers when I was very, very young in the early 80s. Mm-hmm. And my mom had this IBM computer with a dual floppy boot system. You had to have these 5 1/4 floppy disks, or actually floppy, and they were like house like a megabyte of data or something really small. And you'd stick them in the computer, boot it up, all that stuff. I could delete things and do some of the things inside the DOS prompt system that was like before I could read and write. And I accidentally deleted stuff, but my mom's like, "You're doing this on purpose." It was a whole thing. It was very weird and strange, but at the same time, I was fascinated with the technology and what it was doing. And so growing up with computers as they were evolving, because the home computer really became available like when I was very, very little. Mm. And I learned so much that I remember 1987, like a friend of mine and I were like dialing into a bulletin board system with one of those phones you see in the movie like War Games. It was like and we're like, oh, where we can find these games? Because his stepdad just got like a 64 megabyte RAM chip. We're like, oh my God, this is so beautiful. 64 megabytes of RAM. I was like, what is this? This is like so much power and space, so much memory. And it blew my mind, the amount of games we were able to access and what we could play. So it was ridiculous. But the technology was there, and it was like this beautiful expansiveness where we could figure it out. And it was like, okay, a megabyte is a weird thing and a weird concept. We don't even think about megabytes anymore. We think about gigabytes. And they've just developed a CD-ROM basic disk that has a pentabyte of storage.
A pentabyte?
Which is insane.
I mean, come on. I know now terabytes are in these little tiny squares, but what the heck is a pentabyte? So, well, you're about to get into it.
Yeah,
anyway, I'll let you take the floor on that pace.
Yeah.
Keep going.
So, there's a beautiful arrangement of information. And we have bytes, which are like the ones and zeros, binary code, bits on to off. Tells a computer yes or no, some little bits of information. And then from bytes, we have kilobytes. So a kilobyte is 1,024 bytes. And this is the mathematical method for it, right?
And this matters especially with how much room people have on their phones and on their computers, but even most specifically on their phones.
So my phone is like a 512 gigabyte phone. And that is one of the higher end Apple phones at the time. I think, there's much more now. But it goes in increments. And when you think about how much space things take up, like a photo can be like anywhere from a few hundred kilobytes to maybe 30 or 40 megabytes. And so a kilobyte being 1,024 bytes, a megabyte is 1,024 kilobytes.
Oh, wow.
And then from megabyte to gigabyte, 1,024 megabytes is a gigabyte. And then 1,024 gigabytes becomes a terabyte. And 1,024 terabytes becomes a petabyte. And so these things, as they structure over and over and over again, it's wild. When people had DSL in the 90s, and that was like the phone lines and how most internet was going through, and you had to dial in, dial-up,
Right.
and people were like working on 14.4 baud modems. It sounded really funny.
C3PO was turning on every
yeah,
time.
right. It was like all those. And so like when you experience some of that stuff, like the interesting thing is the technology for those things. Like AT&T has developed incredible high-speed pen-to-flop, which is like a petabyte access point that allows supermassive data to go that way. And then we mostly use like wireless communications, like 5G network. All the different networks that have been used are based on some of these technologies that have evolved over the years through cell phones, and a lot of that data transference tech is all there because based on how much memory, how much storage, how much transference you can have without any loss. And so all of these things as it relates together, it's like, okay, when we connect with streaming, we're using a certain amount of megabytes or gigabytes each time we stream. We like interact with the internet, and all that now can go relatively seamlessly wirelessly and through like Wi-Fi and even Bluetooth, and sometimes with the satellite connections. And so like there's all these weird ways of communicating and getting out there, but still it's based on handling a large flow of data. And being able to have that large flow of data capability makes it so you can have streaming parties with your friends, where you're playing video games together across the country or the world or whatever it is, and have no lag time, or even if it's a little bit of lag time, having conversations with people simultaneously is in consuming video. It's like all these things, it's wild. If your phone is not really running or having like limited source, you're not going to be able to do as much. You're going to have to, turn it off occasionally, let it dump its RAM, turn it back on. And so it's like you have so much space, and you might have a lot of photos or a lot of apps or a lot of these different little things, and they take up space. That's the thing that's really hard. Duplicate photos and all those things. Yeah, there's apps you can like find the right ones, but you also have to be careful it's not deleting the big quality ones if you want to still have a high resolution one versus a small, tiny little pixelated thing that really is not going to look good.
Yeah, that's
and so those small, like kilobyte size ones, those are really small. And if you look at them on your phone, like they're okay, but then you look at them on a computer, like, oh gosh, it's really small. If I zoom in, it's really blurry, and it's not really helpful when it up-reses. And so knowing some of the capacity of what you have and where to store your data and how to have that stuff is helpful. Like on my phone right now, I have 82,900 and some photos and videos. It's a little bit ridiculous. It's completely insane. I can't even get my computer to connect to my phone to download them. So I had to set up an iCloud and have it automatically update all there, so that way I wouldn't lose everything. I have a 4.5-year-old daughter, and so I have a lot of photos of her being silly, little crazy stuff. She does performances for me. It's wild. But also I'm a photographer and a filmmaker, and so I use this for work. I have a lot of content I need to get places. And so where you share and how you get it to people is like, well, that's a question of itself too. When cloud technology first started coming out, and people were like, it's all about the cloud. It's all about the cloud. It's like the cloud's good, but like when your internet goes down, you're like, I can't access the cloud. That's exhausting. And so there's certain points where that will happen. But we also have to live in a society where we can expect the unexpected, and we can't guarantee that things are always going to be there. That's why I have an encyclopedia set at home too. So it's like if the internet goes down, my kid wants to learn some sort of thing, I'm like, oh, here's an A through Z. What do you want to learn about? And then there's a lot of opportunity for that kind of dialogue. But it's still like, there's lo-fi elements and then the high-tech elements, but they're all related to it all.
Yeah, and you might want to check into security too when it comes to whatever you get onto the cloud, huh?
Yeah, so like, having two-factor authentication is one of the most important things. Like, so if you have a phone being text, a security code to access to your accounts further, not just your password. Because passwords, I've found that if you ask any cybersecurity expert, there's like 5 or 6 passwords that people consistently use, and it's not helpful because they're not making them really wide variety. When you use things like LastPass, which is really cool, you basically can have an algorithmically created, really complicated password that stores securely for you, and all that's in there. But how secure is LastPass? How secure are these things? So you have to trust the apps that you're using are going to keep those safe and secure. Like people store their Google Chrome passwords on the cloud, and then all of a sudden if their Google Chrome gets hacked, then all those passwords are available. When you sign up for services and you use the same password on different websites, that site, it could get hacked, and all of your password information gets sold out there to hackers. And so like you have to be like, okay,
so painful to think.
I know people use separate passwords for each app that they use, separate passwords for everything that is not there. I know some people just write them down on a note, like a notepad, post-it note, so it's never anywhere digital. And so there's a lot of ways that you can do it, but then someone finds that notepad, uh-oh. keep it a secure place. I mean, there's all these things that what we're doing, and if, heaven forbid someone passes away, and you need to be able to help retain or pull down like their social media so you have like the memories of them, their photos, all that stuff, or even change it. It's important to have a list where you share it with your emergency contact. This is who I am, this is how you can access the things online. This is where you go, these are my passwords for all this stuff, and then you can help through it. And so like you have to be mindful of security, yes, but at the same time, don't make it so secure that you forget yourself and you can never access it. I run into people who are like, I don't know how to access my YouTube channel. I was like, well, why not? They're like, I don't know how to access the email that I started it with. And I was like, oh man.
Oh.
And then they have no recovery on there. And some of those email systems, maybe they go defunct. Maybe they're no longer valid. Maybe the emails have actually closed down. Maybe the ways in which they interacted or stored that no longer is supported and that app got defunct. Maybe the company got bought out by another company and is no longer supported. Maybe they have a new version of it completely changed in a different infrastructure that didn't map your things over. There's so many things that can happen and change. Nothing is a guarantee. Yeah. Everything is impermanent. And the beautiful thing about the past 20 plus years in technology is we've been able to see so many things rise and fall. And so many things have explosive, passionate things that people get fervent about, and they're really excited, and they're like want to be a part of. Like when people get into TikTok, and like, oh, this is really intense.
Well,
but still.
Touching back base on storage, something that I appreciate investing in myself are the little 2 terabyte hard drives. So for instance, I have the same problem that you do with so many photos and videos on my phone. But what I'm currently doing on my computer to make way and make things work and on my phone is first I've created albums in my phone. So I'm going through all my photos and videos and making sure that like I even want them. I have like, I don't know, 20 different albums, and if it can't go in one of those albums, there's no reason for me to have it. That's my first step. So if anybody's going through that, maybe that's a good way for you. But I have like 70,000 to go through, so maybe by the end of the year I'll get done with that. But either way, it's leading towards me using these 2 terabyte external hard drives to store all of my photos on one of them. Currently I have all my DJ music on one of them. Yep. So even my computer itself doesn't have to hold on to so many things that would bog it down and make it hard to use. So you could even use, and I use these 2 terabyte hard drives no matter how much I've got, because I don't quite imagine that if I'm only using it for, say, photos, that I maybe will fill it up. I'm not talking about being a professional photographer though. So I'm giving myself plenty of space, and these cost like $20 or $25 each, maybe. And so then each one has its own little label, and it's like a window. So when you open up these 2 terabyte hard drives or whatever size you have, then it's kind of like a little window into that storage, and you can manipulate it or use it however you want to.
I love external drives. There's a lot of things I really find challenging when you have maybe 30 or 40 of them. I don't even know how many external drives I have, but I have buckets and cases and palettes. But I've been doing film for for a very long time, and film and digital film takes up a lot of space. And I've done a lot of content creation. I've done TV pilots. I've done video game marketing. I've done all sorts of different things that have a lot of space and a lot of time. And so finding like a cadence where you have an update, you move things off. Data file management is one of the most effective and beautiful things. Like literally having a structure to your folders where you're like photos, and then maybe type of photo instead of date range. Because the date range thing, if like you use Apple Computer or anything like that, like photos will be like, oh, this is your timeline. This is all the things in a date range, a chronology of it all. So it's like you could do a chronology of things, but I found categorizing them based on tags that you want to implement. Like I'm an Apple user for the most part, and I can tag photos with a indicator, like a hashtag. Like this is what this is. And then all of those photos will have that tag. It's got a nice color associated to it. I can choose that stuff. And so I have some things like for my daughter, it's like purple. And I have all these little things that I'm like, if I look for her little name, I'm like, I can find all the photos that have her in it. It makes it easier. So I can upload those to like a little SD card, put in one of those digital frames and give it to my mom and my dad. I'm like, look, it's your granddaughter, check it out. And so like these small little things, like what we use and how we're using them, we take so many things, but like what we're doing with them after, really matters. And some things are like, I'll share that online, I'll share this with people. And some things are like, this is for me and the family, or this is my personal stuff. I'm not going to share this stuff online. Oh no. But you still want to know where they are. And I love your album thing. And also I think like with iPhone, shared albums are like one of my favorite things right now. So if other people are using iCloud and albums, that you can say, hey, I'm just going to share this photo shoot with you, and then all these 900 some photos are just in this iCloud album that you can access and I can access. And oh yeah, if you don't like any, let's like earmark those, and you like some, let's put those in a different album. And then we can curate the things. Because when I take photos of people, it's like you can go so many photos, and sometimes their eyes are closed, and sometimes there's these movements that they don't feel comfortable with, and you're like, oh, I don't like the way this light works, I don't like the way I frame this, and so there's all these subjective feels you have around it. But taking the time to go through it, it's like, it's hard. And so finding that time to data management, where you put things, it's like you have a goal of wanting to get through 70,000 photos like this year. It's like, I think a goal is like, I'd like to be able to find where I can put these things and work on them. And my goal will be, like, again, a processivity thing where I'm going to process this. I'm going to spend 30 minutes a week dedicated to, I'm going to take some things off my phone, take things off my computer, and put them in places where I need them to go. That way you're making incremental progress with this large, huge thing, and you don't feel like I'm not getting it done. You're doing the process, and you're getting the process done. And that is where we fear the grand amount of things, the amount of space we have, and we're like, oh no, I have enough. Just keep working on it. Just keep plugging away. Chug, 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 chug. Little engine that could style. And so like we can make movement, and you can move mountains, and as it turns out, water can do every bit of destroying a mountain. It just takes a lot of time, and a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time, right?
Smooth.
Smooth like water.
Yeah, and you did touch base on, like, if you were to share something with a family member printed out or something, that's another point on what kind of quality you want. And quality, in case this wasn't completely covered, quality and size are succinct with each other.
Yeah, they correlate.
So the larger the size of video or image or whatever, then the sharper the image.
Yeah,
generally.
so like if I have two images of the same one, and one's 300 kilobytes and one's like 1 megabyte or something like that, I will save the 1 megabyte. The other one's like a thumbnail. I'm like, oh, okay, it'll look really good small. But when I blow it up, I can't be able to do anything with it. I can't put it on canvas. It'll look really pixelated. Unless that's actually what I'm going for, a really highly pixelated thing, which sometimes I'm really into that. But that's a specific thing, and I do it on purpose.
Yeah.
And I even actually take the pixelated one and the high-res one, and sometimes I'll blend the two of them together to create a little bit of an artistic feel around it. And so that's kind of a fun thing you could do with that instead of deleting them.
Yeah.
I'm a digital hoarder, though.
Me too. The good news about art is that it's all perspective, All right, and there's another quote that I absolutely love, which was, if no one knows what you're doing doing it wrong. So if you wanted it pixelated, maybe if it was an accident, but, maybe not.
Maybe not. And actually, it's funny because, like, to even talk about, like, quality of camera, what you're capturing on, it's like you don't need the most high-tech, beautifulest, high-res, megapixel, whatever kind of thing. Like, I can make content on the Fisher-Price camcorder they made in the early, 90s. It's like this really cheap quality, black and white, fuzzy kind of thing. And at the same time, this rudimentary thing is beautiful. And it's interesting.
I guess, if you are working with something that doesn't give you quite what you think you want, you could adjust what you think you want.
Yeah, and you can also add filters and do a lot of things. So like one of my favorite things is like this VHS style look, interlaced lines, some hiccups and jitters and some of those things. I even have a VCR. So like I put like dump things from YouTube that I want to bootleg and then give people as like a gift as a VHS tape, and it's like this, what, you just printed out something on YouTube and have it on a tape I can watch on my TV. And if I had a VCR, what is a VCR? And so like, all these questions and conversations, but it's like a really interesting thing, and it's like even giving them out as like business cards, it's like this is a wild thing. So like as a filmmaker, it's like how do you maintain memorability and sustain some sort of like interest with people? And it's like you do something different. You do something that's completely wild, and some people are like tape decks and tape cassettes and having like their music demo on a tape. It's like that's ridiculous. Who has tapes anymore? Like, well, a lot of people have tapes, but like who's making tapes and giving them out for things? Like, well, some really interesting people, and then you remember them, and then you find a tape deck to play that thing. It's wild.
going to write down my name and email address and like YouTube channel on a floppy disk. I'll have like 30 of them to give out like business cards.
You don't have to put anything on them. And actually, like one of my favorite things is where people have like a USB stick, and it's basically like all their little brand things on it, like the how-tos, what the business is, their little white pages or whatever it is. But they also have like, you can do fun vinyl creations or whatever things to make a USB stick available to and store things on, so you can shape them however you want. There's little ducks. Aflac has like the little
like
Aflac
rubber
thing.
duckies.
Yeah, I have a rubber ducky USB thing.
There's
it's adorable.
so many rubber duckies too. No, I was actually thinking of the kind that float.
Those are good. I bought like a few hundred of those when my daughter was born. I just started giving out to people at the hospital. I was like, hey, thanks for the help with this. They're like, what's a rubber duck about? And this is like this curious question thing, but it makes people stop.
Yeah.
And I think making people stop with all the business we have going on is it's crazy. And so when you taking a bunch of pictures, taking a bunch of photos and videos and doing all these things and amassing this large content library, you have to stop. You have to review. You have to take time and notice this stuff. This is where like the data management thing is so easy. So once you get a system in place, you can manage it. Now your phone's not crushed on data all the time, and I have no space on it. Like, oh, I can't even add this app right now. Like, what on earth is going on? Your apps are actually storing a lot of information, and some apps that you never use store so much data. And sometimes you have to just like delete stuff and be okay with it. And sometimes it's not able to be put back on it. And that's wild. But you have to be okay with the impermanence of it all, because nothing is guaranteed.
Sure.
Really.
Okay. Okay, guys, I had to get us a little bit closer here because I was cooking our guest star. So if you are watching this podcast, I'm sure that you saw the lighting, and that goes into the next phase of what we were going to talk about, which is the video staging and creating. Not 2 weeks ago did I have my last guest star here in the exact same room, in the exact same place, and we didn't have any lighting problems with the sun in that person's face at all, but we did now 2 weeks later. So, Mike, you want to touch base on that?
Yeah, so working in film and video is not my first foray into lighting in general. I started doing lighting in high school theater, and I have explored, practiced, and made a lot of mistakes around how to light things effectively and well, especially for video. And so when I think about video creation, like there's the video capturing, there's lighting, and then there's sound. Sound is like one of the most important elements. Sound is like 80% of a video. It's audio. It's not even what the video looks like or any of that kind of stuff. And sometimes with lighting where it gets too hot, so like the really, really bright parts of me, that's where the sun's hitting, and this is what we call hot. The camera sensors in these phones and these devices, they don't have a capability of really discerning that because they're trying to let in a lot of the exposure to be able to get the general idea of what it is. But when things are too bright, they get overexposed in certain spots. And sometimes it can look wildly strange. I have some friends that do some really interesting things with exposure, and they make art with it. And it's this like live video elements. And so you can find that that might be part of your aesthetic, part of your brand, part of what you want things to look. And you can also find that it's different. If you overexpose things and blow them out white, you can miss people's ability to see the details, and sometimes it becomes too bright for them to even pay attention to. And so that's a factor.
Yeah, and and I did want to mention too that last recording that I had done, it was the same time of the day. It's just about the earth moving. In photography, one of the things that you don't want to do normally if you're shooting somebody is shoot them when the sun is in the middle of the sky right above them, because then you get these really beautiful shadows
harsh shadows. Yeah, high noon. It's different. So that's
it's the worst time for photography.
The golden hour,
right?
Where the sun is at the lowest. And it's hitting so softly, and it's going through the atmosphere. It's creating all these different color palettes. There's beauty in some of that stuff, and you can recreate it. And I've been on film sets where I've had to have a giant light outside a window beaming in to replicate what the sun was, and even Venetian blinds and moving those things around to create like little effects of how much sunlight might be in there. And also, depending on how long it takes you to film, having a light source that's consistent means that it's not going to move. And the sun moves, and so no matter how long you're filming, you can guarantee that you're going to have a difference. A cloud might go overhead, maybe not. It could be overcast. Overcast is actually one of the best things. Well, there's these things called French flags that basically can block out whole chunks of sun that like are these framed black muslin kind of fabric things. They can go in size all the way up to like the size of, I don't know, half of the size of a house's width or something like that. It's crazy. But you can create like a shadow space that is something you can control within the outside that then gives you capacity for it. There's also something that you can put on the windows, which is like a neutral diffuser, so it's like a neutral density diffuser, ND. It makes it so that way certain light comes through, but not a lot of it. And so there's certain things you can do for your environment to help structure how you are able to capture it in film-wise. So many varieties.
To staging, I think that one of the biggest things is light.
Yeah.
What is happening with your light? Where is it coming from? And is it flattering whatever it is you're trying to get across to your audience?
Right. And we have things like key lights, fill lights, backlights, all these different concepts of lights. So in a interview setup, normally how I would do it is I would have a bright light near me where I have a key light. So that's part of this. A little light further away so that way it has fill light so it doesn't have harsh shadows. It adds a little bit of fill. When you see shadows on the face, it's called modeling. And so you can have like your fist. As a filmmaker, I use my fist to see which shadow arrangement is going. So I can rotate my fist. I can see how harsh the shadows are and where it goes. You can use a light meter for some of these things too. There's things like f-stops and all that stuff with photography and lenses and all these different pieces. But at the same time, what light you have and the natural ability for you to see it, you can tell relatively simply. And our cameras are all really at such a good spot where it's not like you have to tweak a lot of stuff.
Yeah, even in nightlife kind of situations, it's fascinating. I mean, that's really
great.
when you want to learn about f-stops, but not if you have an iPhone nowadays. I think you're pretty good.
You're pretty good. And there's a lot of really amazing cameras out there. And then
Yeah.
the phones are like, it's like you can have the thing shareable easily. And it's like, that's a simple cut through the process. Like when I was working at Warner Brothers and I was using like big cameras and all these things, I was like, I have to spend time transferring it over to my computer. Then I have to like smallify it, make it so it's shareable. It's like all these weird processes you have to go through. But then like I just started using my phone like in 2011. I was like, I'm just gonna use my iPhone, and I was like doing a lot of social media for video games, and it was like this whole thing that was very strange. But I ended up being able to produce content quickly, which all my executives loved that, and like getting it out so that way I wouldn't have a delay. It was like, well, the timeliness and the relevancy of it, that's magic.
Yeah, I use Dropbox for sharing. What are some other tools that you use? Because like if it's a bigger file, I have to use Dropbox, but I'm sure there are other ones.
Dropbox is helpful, but when people don't have Dropbox, they have to sign up for it if you share it in a way that they just can't download the thing. So if you give them like the link to your folder and they can download the image or the video or whatever it is, then that makes it easier. If they're adding it to their Dropbox has a certain capacity, and so Dropbox wants it so that way they also pay Dropbox for the access to higher levels. And so you have a free account, and then you have the paid accounts, and professional accounts, and all those different elements in between. I really like Dropbox because you can add comments, and you can go through and have dialogues about, okay, I like this about this. There's a bunch of different apps that you can collaborate on and share. Like WeTransfer is something for really high video things. Sending someone just like one giant file, they have a download link, boom. There's ways that you can get people to view your stuff, but if you have a lot of things and you want them to view a lot of it, I like also Google Drive. Most people have a Gmail account. Most people have a Drive. Some people pay for the extra space on Drive. If you give someone access to it, they don't need to pay to be able to ensure that they can actually bring it into their computer or look at it. And so it's kind of like how do I interact with other people? And when I'm sharing things, if I'm sharing it and adding them to a folder, is it going to impact their ability to download this? So I do a lot of real estate advertising, and sometimes people are like, here's every photo and video I've ever taken on my phone or whatever, or professionally done, and it's all in my one Dropbox. And I add that Dropbox to my thing. I'm like, well, now that one's out of file space, and I have to increase that. And even if you have a terabyte, it can sometimes go, especially if you have a lot that you work with. And so really it's like Apple sharing the shared photos in the iCloud is also one of the easiest ways to do it, because people get it, they can download it, They can add them to their albums and save things offline, and it's a simple thing. So if they work iPhone to iPhone, great, AirDrop it to them locally. Or like, however you want to do these things. There's mechanisms to share that are outside of it. If you're not near them, yeah, find the thing that works for you. Dropbox isn't always going to be around. Use it for now, but don't trust that everything in there is going to be stored safely. Keep a backup. Right. And so everything you store anywhere on the cloud or anywhere, I'm like, I literally use external hard drives like you do, where I store things. I'm like, I do that. But I also use Post-it notes labeling those external hard drives, and I like do inventory sometimes, and I'll write down what is in there, what I've changed it to be, what things I can expect to find on there. And sometimes if I'm going through, I literally have to plug in one at a time so many different external drives to find like where that one file was that one time I did that one thing. I don't know. Maybe. I'm still looking for some photos from 2012 because I'm trying to put a book together of like macro photos of some flowers. And I was like, where did I put that?
Yeah, and then I'm sure you've got other photos of flowers in places, probably, right?
I do.
Might be confusing, harder to find then.
The one from 2012, though, I want specifically is from the Bouchard Gardens up in Victoria, British Columbia. It's like the most amazing. It's like a stone quarry that this lady was like, I want a garden. Her husband was like, you got it, babe, and turned a whole thing into this giant, beautiful garden. It's majestic. You have to take like a little ferry ride from Seattle to get there. It's easy.
Well, maybe soon AI will be able to dig through our files because we all know that's going to be exciting, and then you'll be able to find it.
They do. Even on an iPhone, you can say, I'd like to find this,
right.
Text it in there. They will look for even text inside the photos.
I've noticed that too. It's pretty neat. Yeah, actually, so if anybody doesn't know this already, you can search inside of your photos, at least on an iPhone. I'm sure there's a way on Androids too. So you can type in flowers, or you could type in, I typed in prescription the other day because I was trying to find my old prescription for my glasses because I had a new appointment. And I typed in RX and eventually found it, the picture of it.
Amazing.
It was really cool. That's all I typed in. Or it also, I think all of them have data as to like where you took the photo. Maybe there are control settings as to whether or not it does hold on to that info, but you can type in like when was or photos from Richardson, Texas, and it'll give me every single photo that I've ever taken in Richardson, Texas. So
I love that stuff, and actually it's important as we talk about security that we touch on some topic with that. So like if you're going to share photos that has your location information on it, people can use that location information for nefarious purposes. So sometimes if you're like, oh, check out this really cool ride I just got, and you share a picture in your car, and you're tweeting it or whatever it is, and people are like, oh, I see what that is. I see your location information. Oh, that's interesting. And so thieves use some of these things. I have this like.
So how do you rid that information from the photo?
You can, when you swipe up on an iPhone for the photo, at the very bottom of it, photo you swipe up onto it has the EXIF information. There's also apps that you can look at the actual metadata. So metadata is what contains this like your name, your phone's information, the data of where you took that, the geotagging stuff. It's really wild how much this information is on there.
And you can just hit
delete.
And
you can delete some of that information or change it. You can change when the date of it was taken. So if you're playing hooky from work and you're like, I don't want people to know I went to this vacation while I was supposed to not be at work, technically, you could change that, but that's not even fair for your work. You should say, hey, I need a mental health day. I'm sorry, I'm going to Disneyland for a moment. I'll BRB, but I'm out of office right now. But still, security-wise, don't share pictures of your kids on some social media. People get really freaked out about, like, oh, I don't know if I should do that. I'm like, yeah, it's scary.
Yeah, touching base on that too, on social media specifically really is, I like to be places and do things and inspire people to go and be places and do things. But what I've learned personally is I'd rather not tell them like which gym I'm at. I'll just say I'm at the gym, for instance. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't think about, because in the long run, they may not want certain kinds of people to have known, like, this is where I am often, or this is where my kid goes to school, yay, tigers or whatever.
It's
don't
freaky.
Even do that, maybe.
It's freaky. And I think that like that's an important thing about like what we're willing to share and who we're willing to share it with. And if you have a very locked down Facebook with private settings and all that stuff, like that's a little bit more secure. You can add people you want to. Instagram's a little safer. There's not going to be like location information people will glean from when you're sharing on Instagram. because it's not the actual file that you're uploading, it's the image going to their system, and that's what they display. And so there's some places that you do social media that's going to be secure. But if you check in places, people will know that you're not at your house.
Right.
That's the thing. If you check in places, people know where you are. If you check in frequently, there's this app called Foursquare, and they changed it to Swarm. And I used to love it because I was the mayor of this taco truck, and I was like, yeah, I go here so often. I'm this like person that always checks in. Everyone knew when I was at the taco truck. I was like, it was wild. So then I was like, oh, I'll just check in after I leave, and I'm not there anymore, and I check in later. And so that was my habit. It was like, well, I'm going to check in places I want people to know and promote, but I'm not going to be there when I do it.
Sure, I've recently picked up on that as well. I'll post something maybe 2 or 3 days later.
Yeah, and that's okay. It's like, later, Graham.
You also get the time to think about it. You get the time to think about how you want to, or how you want to structure it, or influence people, or inspire people, or whatever. But back to the video staging, with working with Warner Brothers, doing all of professional filmmaking and photography that you've done, what are some really basic kind of oopsie things people have on their screen, either in a photo or in a video? Like, whoops, there's like a teacup that I forgot to pick up. My throat was dry earlier or something.
Yeah, so in film we call this mise en scène. So it's like the structure of the scene, and it's one of my favorite concepts. It's about proximity to the camera, placement of things, items, background, all this stuff. So people can have very distracting elements in the background, like your beautiful, beautiful stained glass over here. It's like this some eye-catching stuff. People pay attention to some of these things. They're like, what is that? If it was moving and doing all sorts of different things, or have some sort of like, critters in the background, people in the background, sometimes like, did you get consent for the people to be in that shot? Did you get consent for those things? And so I find that if people make content, especially publicly, this is where it can get problematic. Like if you're making things, yes, you're in a public place, it's okay for you to film. You might not need a permit. Some places you need a permit, especially if you use a tripod and have a camera locked down. So there's things you have to be aware of. I've been professionally trained on this because I'm like, all right, I need to know these things. But I also know guerrilla filmmaking and running and gunning and just trying to like make it work. But you really want to get permission. If you're filming in a store, technically you should have a location release from the person who owns that store for you to share that content online, technically. If you're having people in your shot, you should have a waiver for them to say, I'm okay with this. If you get some sort of waiver on camera saying, hey, are you okay being on my thing? And they give a visual confirmation, tell you who you are, tell them who they are, then that's something you can keep your records. You don't share that part maybe online. You have that for when you're like, oh no, this person totally gave me their permission. And so consent is a huge thing. Having waivers and releases and that kind of stuff, if you're doing it professionally, it's helpful. Sometimes I'll be running around just like a backpack with a sign on it that says, filming in progress. If you're in this area, you're consenting to be on camera.
Genius, actually, that's very genius. And can't you blur people in the background? Would that
be
considered okay? Maybe.
Yeah.
I know there's settings like that. I think it's called cinematic on my phone.
Well, even cinematic will help soft focus. So basically, the focus in the front, and it'll blur things out in the background. And that's helpful. If you don't have it on that setting, everything in the background is going to be clear and visible. If you are live streaming and some people don't want to be in it, you could just angle it towards their legs walking. That's what a lot of news gathering does. So electronic news gathering, like films for TV, radio, and all that kind of stuff, they don't necessarily have the time or capacity to get everyone they're filming's approval. And so they'll show not faces. They'll show parts neck down. And so there's different tricks you can do that are also helpful for that. So if you're filming in a location and there's a lot of people, make it so that way you can see your face but not theirs, unless you ask for permission. So that's like the biggest thing is like, in the frame and what is around you while you're filming, it's a factor. And if branded stuff, that's a scary thing too. I tried to release this website when we were working on this game called Gotham City Imposters, and we had made this fake website for an energy drink inside the game that gives you like a power up, so like Vigor Chug, and it was like this whole weird thing. And I was running it through my Warner Brothers law offices, and they were like, well, there's this Indian drink company calling themselves Vigor, and we really feel like it's a dangerous thing, and so they're like, we don't want to be sued. We don't want to be sued. That was the thing. And so I couldn't couldn't make it go. I was like, so sad about these things. I was like, this is ridiculous. I made a lot of really weird animated GIFs. It was funny. It was a tongue-in-cheek kind of thing. It was this like weird Batman game with a shooter aspect to it. And I was like, well, all these weird variety of things of what we're doing might be completely crazy if we fake this like entire thing and make a product that we're not actually selling, but then we're just actually promoting the game. So it was like, how do we promote something without really promoting it directly? And using some sort of interesting thing that gets them into it. You have to be worried about what you're branding it, what you're naming it, all these different logos or the colors and something. If you have like a hat and it has a brand on it, I put gaff tape or black tape over it. You can blur it out, but that takes time. It's just like, hey, put your shirt inside out, please. Some sort of like, t-shirt that has something on it. Like, it gets complicated. And people like to wear whatever they want to wear, and I'm amazed with how many people are just putting things out there right now with other people's brands on it, and eventually it could be something that gets taken down from the internet because you didn't get permission to use that brand and their logo or any of it.
Yeah, going into, that's two different avenues actually, permission and editing tools. Yeah. So which way do you want to go down first, Mike?
Permission I think we already covered. I feel that really consent and permission, it's like if you own some sort of logo or brand.
Music.
Yeah, music is another thing too. Like if you use music, you have to have permission from the creator of the music or who owns the license for that music.
Right. The good news is that inside of like Instagram and Facebook, they have music options for you for your stories or your reels or whatever, and you can assume that those are safe for those specific social media tools. And so at least there's that.
They've paid for those licenses.
Yep.
Like they've paid to be able to have those music libraries available.
Yeah.
And on Apple phone, like if you're like, oh, I get this little memory thing, and it has all this like automatic music that it puts to my thing. It's like sometimes you'll find that bass music, you try and upload that to social media. It's like, hey, this music's actually copyrighted.
I've tried that.
We're going to take it off. And so it's like, well, you can't just trust what the app uses. And so like if you have a thing through like YouTube, it's like YouTube has its own repository of music that you can choose from. Freemusicarchive.org is a great place of a lot of public domain music. You can find which ones are available for Creative Commons. Licensing and all that stuff is complex. But if you can use it for commercial use, if you're making money on it, that's a thing. Some things you can't use for commercial use unless you pay to be able to use it. Like if I want to use a radio song that I really love in a car commercial, I'm like, okay, I have to track down where that is and I can pay for it. And you license it for a period of time. Like there was this David Bowie song that Commander Chris Hadfield made in space, beautiful music video, first one done in space. He could only have it online for a year. That was what the license agreement was. And so it's like all these little small things for so long.
All the more inspiring to possibly pay your local and friend music creators, producer DJs, I should say, and music creators and musicians. So,
and they're talented people, and they can make things that sound like other things too. You say, hey, I use this as a scratch track. Could you make something like it? Yeah. And I've had conversations with a lot of musicians around that. And I'm lucky to have a very wonderful eclectic group of people that I've been able to trust and gain trust with, where they're like, yeah, you can use my music. Just give me credit. And they know that we can promote each other, and then that's a beautiful reciprocity thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's this beautiful musician named Glenn Kreitzer in New York, and he's developing a speakeasy, jazzy kind of big band like place to go and have all this stuff happening. And he's like this big band guy, absolutely brilliant musician. And I've used a lot of his music for my short films, and it's one of those things that I'm trying to use his stuff on TV pilots, and I know that those things are going to be like perfect for some of the stuff I want to do. But it's that personal relationship and getting the permission, and also ensuring that there's money pathways that people can gain from the commercial uses of stuff.
Right.
The most important thing is these people do not make a lot of money when they create their music, and the pathways for music is limited. And so there's licensing that is like, it is appropriate to pay a musician to use their song. It is appropriate to pay someone for their work. Art is not free. Art is something that if you want to use it for your purposes to make your money or promote your brand, you have to be respectful of that. You have no idea what you could do in ruffling feathers, especially if something gets popular.
Right.
Oof.
Well, and then that trails into our editing conversation. So one of the things we haven't touched base on yet is all the different tools that you can use to edit your videos and your photos. Of course, with photos, you want your contrast and colors and sharpening to be however it is you want. Same with your videos. You may want to piece things together. And what do you have to say about editing tools? Because I like certain ones, but
I love editing tools, and honestly, there's so many that pop into the scene and out of the scene. Like, I first started working on Microsoft's Windows Movie Maker, and it was like the free editing software in the early aughts that I was able to gain access to. Then I moved to Sony Vegas Video, which is like the professional one. You can make lightsabers in that, which is awesome. And there's all these different things you can do. You can keyframe stuff. Keyframe means I'm going to have the frames move, but I'd like this thing to move with it, with maybe certain movements along it. So if I wanted to put something and attach it and have it follow some sort of visual thing in the video, you have to sort through what that looks like. Nowadays, there's things like Adobe Premiere and After Effects where you can literally, like, I'm just going to pin this to this relative place, use this general area, and it will do it all automatically for you. And so you can have all these things work in a functional environment. So I think that, like, there's apps that are on the phone, they're free, that are helpful. CapCut's like one of the things. CapCut's like this easy thing people can access and use. GoPro has some great apps too. Splice and GoPro's Quick. I love those. Those are delightful. So if I'm doing some sort of quick and dirty outdoors thing, I just want to, like, put together a little recap video that I don't really want to pay that much attention to. I can just see what the app will put up with. And it's a bunch of AI driven stuff, and you can do the Ken Burns effect for photos and have you like, I'm going to slowly go, I'm going to move in, move around. And so there's all these things that you can do that can help you create content, and the editing platform you use is like what is most comfortable. Sometimes I'm on my phone only, and I'm not even like using my computer. I'm just like putting it together, and I throw it up and it's done. You can edit on Instagram, YouTube, Canva. There's all these different places that you can edit.
Canva's great.
Canva's great. It's like a simple thing, but like it's accessible.
Great for postcards.
It's great for postcards. It's great for invitations.
Right.
Like, I mean, if you really want to make stuff, you know, some of these tools out there are helpful, and you can really find beautiful things. I love the Adobe suite for things, like Adobe Spark. There's all these like small things. It's kind of like a Canva type thing where you can do text overlays, you can do images, you can do videos, you can create what you're trying to look like, and you could even use some of their like auto templates and prefab stuff that, and when you share them, people are like, how did you do this? I'm like, well, I'm not even a graphic designer, but check it out, I did this.
Right.
And then with editing and video, it's like, well, how did you get this crazy thing to happen? How'd you make that background replace? There's beautiful things out there.
Right, and all of these apps most of the time these days will give you little information bars when you first sign in, like this is what this does and this is what this does. Try this out.
Yeah.
You also like one called DaVinci, right?
DaVinci's great. So
on the desktop.
So DaVinci is a computer-based one, and you can download, I think, Windows, Mac, that kind of stuff, Linux. It is a free video application. The paid version, I think, is like a few $100. You just pay it once. With Adobe, you have to pay consistently for the Creative Cloud and have access to that. You used to be able to pay for it like once, but then you'd have to buy each new version when it came out of.
Yeah, I liked it better that way, though. When you would have to upgrade from it. I mean, when I like digging deep into photography editing, it was nice to just stick with one thing. And then if I needed whatever the more was, I could go buy the more.
Yeah, and I've really liked the Adobe Creative Cloud, where it's been something that I've been able to allow the technology that they've adapted and created to come to me, and I've been able to learn the new things. Like when I can replace an entire background or quickly remove something digitally without having to like painstakingly rotoscope it out. Like I remember one time I was working on this short film where we were doing a black and white TV show inside of a dream by a comatose person. It was very strange. And we had these yellow balloons that my friend Corey was going to walk in with, like, oh, delivery, and I had to make the balloons the only color in the actual scene.
But the balloons are moving.
9 hours to cut out frame by frame this 36-second clip of these balloons, and it was like, well, one of my first times doing it, and the technology wasn't the best, so I had to manually use a pen tool, and it's very much like a methodical process. And so it's something that now there's like, oh, I want only this color to show up.
Yeah, keep the balloons going.
And so like now, even with AI, it's like you can generate some things that are really weird, and it's very interesting. And a lot of dialogues around like what people are like, how are we going to keep this as a business? How are these things going to move? So like the dialogue around like even video editing, it's growing and evolving right now, and it's already grown and evolved so much. I remember editing on a straight cut system, which is like where a tape to tape reel, and I'm putting together like, you know, Super 8 or 16 millimeter things with tape itself and cutting that kind of thing. And I've learned classical filmmaking, so that way I'm like, I could do everything. And each new thing that comes out, digital or otherwise, I'm like, well, what does this play with, and how can I use this, and what filters are on there, and what fun thing can I get out of this? What text overlays, what explosions can I add to stuff? Like there's so many different features you can add into things. Sometimes it gets too busy, but then sometimes the too busy is hilarious. You might want to do that. Sometimes having nothing in it, it's like, I don't know how to keep my audience going or really entertained with some of these things. Sometimes you need to put lower thirds, and sometimes editing that together, like that's a complicated thing. Names.
Yeah. And to add on to this is that if you don't want to dive deep into any kind of apps or tools or anything, just go into your phone and play with all of the different options that there are. You don't even need to know what they mean. Contrast, brightness, fill light, black point.
Saturation.
Yeah, just play with them. Yeah, you can become an Oompa Loompa if you want to.
Yeah, and it's like it's the freedom to give yourself the opportunity to make mistakes and play around and mess around. And you, if you're worried about like, you know, ruining a thing, you just duplicate. You make a version that you can edit on, and then you can change it however you want to and save a new version. I love that kind of stuff, and it really makes it so that way it's accessible and you don't have to ruin the original. That's a big thing I like, is I like to have the original, and I like to have one that I've made, filtered, or whatever it is. That way I at least have a reference point and I have a raw version. So that for me is really helpful. And I keep those usually together.
And another topic on the visuals of everything is aspect ratio. This is a fun one.
Oh man, aspect ratio is beautiful. So like right now here on this one, this is a 16:9 wide, and over here on this one, this is a 9:16. So it's kind of like this flop thing where it's like the cinematic movie experience, sort of movie experience, so that widescreen thing. It's like that's how a lot of YouTube channels go, and a lot of like even Facebook video works really well. Square works really well for Instagram, but really it's like this portrait ones where it's like the full vertical thing. That's what most people are looking on their phones. Like the entire last part of Game of Thrones was delayed and a lot of different things because AT&T wanted to have them reshoot it so that it would look really good on a vertical phone.
What?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And when I'm thinking about that too, I'm also visualizing, for instance, the rule of thirds and where an eye might be or where a hand might be, whatever it is that you want to focus on. Could you enhance on that a little bit?
Yeah, and so like we also have things like headroom, nose room. So there's all this stuff around us in terms of like, you know, where the frame ends and where it goes. And if there's too much here or too much below us, like what are we really paying attention to? What are we really focusing on? So like on this one where I'm at, this is more of the third that I'd be in the upper left-hand corner of the third. So I'm basically a grid right here, a grid right here, and a line going right here, and a line going right here.
And for those of you listening, he essentially cut the entire image of himself into like 9 different squares, even squares.
It's a tic-tac-toe board, essentially. And so like when you think about these things as a tic-tac-toe board, and this whole vertical landscape and horizontal landscape differences, like they're all the very similarity elements. And when our eyes, as human beings, we go towards certain parts, we gravitate to it. And so if we make our eyes go to a certain place easy, then we know that people will follow what we're trying to say a lot better. If we're filming ourselves and we're like in a far corner, somewhere really awkward, it's going to be weird for the person watching that. They're going to feel unsettled. Sometimes you want that. And sometimes you can actually use the frame to make between a vertical and a horizontal where it's like slightly Dutch or a canted shot, and you're creating a disoriented feel where people are like, I don't really know what's going on, but maybe that's what you want. Like talking about like some sort of like weird dream you had or some sort of place where you felt out of place or disoriented, a fish out of water.
Yeah, wasn't there a movie that was causing people to like throw up because of the camera angle?
Yeah.
It's like a horror film or something.
There's a lot of those, and I think that like one of my favorite film techniques where there's you know, someone running in a horror movie and the camera's right in their face and they're running and you can see from their perspective and everything else seems jumbly, but their face is in focus right there. It's called the snorri cam. And you can build these things with like PVC pipes and you just literally attach it to somebody's chest, and it's like basically like right here, and you run with it. It's wild. It's so fun, but it creates such an interesting effect. And so sometimes there's really cool tools and camera dollies and some of those things that help. that really can kind of accentuate what you're doing. But like when you think of like ratio and frame size and all those things, like you're never really going to go wrong with whatever you use. It's just some places it's not going to be capable. Like Pinterest, they like a 4:5 ratio. What is that? TV used to be a 4:3 ratio, so it's like a strange thing, and then it's like all these different shapes and sizes. Luckily, if you go into any of these apps, they're like, I've got all these different frame sizes. What kind of frame size do you want? You can play with a bunch of them. I recommend making the same video in 3 different frame sizes. One that's this landscape, one that's some sort of portrait thing, and one that's square. So like when I use advertising, I will create the different videos so that way they can go different places organically. And if they can feel comfortably in that organical setting, then people are like, oh, I don't feel like this is some sort of weird, I'm watching a YouTube video with this large landscape, and there's only video in the very center. And it's like, it's very awkward and weird, and I like it to expand out, but I'm also missing the things on the top of the bottom. Like, what is that about? Some people will make it so that way the background is the same video, and it's like playing a little bit blurry and fuzzy, and so that can help fill the space. And YouTube will do that with some of the videos as well, just that way they like make it so that way you're using the whole platform's capabilities. But filling the screen and that kind of stuff, Square is pretty simple. It works really well. A 1:1 ratio, 1080 by 1080, or 20 by 20, whatever it is you end up doing in terms of size and capacity. And again, it's like, you know, when you have things in frame, you can pay attention to it. Some things, like if your shoes are showing in a long shot, like, oh my gosh, are my shoes okay? Right? And so like all these little pieces of what you're looking like and what you feel comfortable with. How much of my hair is in the shot. If I have my mohawk up, it gets a little bit too much for sometimes. And like it gets cut off, and that's not fine. So doing a pompadour like this, where it's like helps me out. Yeah, pompadour mohawk, right? Pompadour.
Nice. I like it.
It's just like one of those things that like it can help limit some of the capacity of, you know, the verticality of me. And so sometimes I'll wear a hat, and I'm like, well, if I'm in an auditorium and I'm behind, or people are behind me, then what is blocking their view? And I am always conscientious of that. But the same thing with film. How we film ourselves and where we're at. This is why the rule of thirds is really good, because you give some space for it. You give some space for how you exist. And then what people are interested in watching you is like, if it's a really weirdly filmed thing, like they might not want to continue watching you. That's the thing. If you make it easy for their eyes and it's this wild thing. I used to work with some psychologists, and we did like eye-hand tracking and where their eyes would go on the screens and all these different little heat map pieces. And it's like where people's visual eyes go, it's pretty standard. We go in and we have this kind of like view. It's usually how we read, and it's like left to right. And so like all of that stuff maps out to how we view video and how we interpret it, because we're really ingesting it visually.
So in relation to video, Mike, is there anything else that is as highly as important, I guess, as lighting?
The most important thing for video is sound, honestly. And so like if you're recording any audio from your onboard camera or your phone or something like that, it's going to sound far away. It's going to sound tinny. It's going to sound a little messed up. And when you're trying to really capture someone's attention, if you don't sound rich like you're actually right there with them, it might lose them. And so video is so much more of an audio element. If you have bad audio, no one's going to watch your video. If you have no audio, you might have to have text on your screen, so that way people will hear what you're saying. And that kind of thing is like, well, if someone's going to watch my content and they're on the city bus or in an airplane or whatever, they might not necessarily have earphones. So the audio you might not think will even matter, but still it matters. And so having microphones, like what we have right now are these wireless lavalier microphones. These things allow us to pick up mostly of what we say and not a lot of the external, everything around us sounds. And so it really helps. It picks up the frequency of our voices at certain levels, and it doesn't have some of the low level things. If you have planes passing by or cars or different things like that, there's frequency ranges for all these things. And so you can have something show up on audio that you didn't even realize was happening. Like, what's that low drone happening? There's some tools that you can actually replace and remove audio beds, and you have to have like a blank space. And so if you have a bunch of weird audio sounds in your environment, be quiet and record like 30 seconds of it. Call it room
see
tone.
what's there.
You call it room tone.
Mm-hmm.
And so like if I have some sort of dialogue that I'm trying to like intercut and replace in between, and I want to be able to like say our conversation, I have to have a opportunity to record no conversation, so that way if I needed to add that as a filler to any space I'm going to edit, it will mask any of the edits or change out our feeling of whether or not we're switching conversations or edits or cuts. it'll just add a layer of things. And so you can do some of these things in more advanced editing suites. Adobe has a great audio program, Audition, that is one of my favorites, and you can literally do so much manipulation in there. Pro Tools and some of those other audio designing places that people use for music are also fabulous for this kind of stuff. But like if you just run and gun and you got your thing, you got okay with like having some diegetic audio sounds, like just the natural sounds that happen while you're experiencing things, like setting a cup down, what that sounds like. So some people add sound effects to things, and sometimes you even add different sound effects for other things to create confusion or whatever sense of feel it is. Like when someone's dribbling a basketball and so you hear gunshots, wildly different. Someone's gunshots and you hear some sort of basketball or squeaky toy, right? So it's like, these things are funny and tongue-in-cheek, but at the same time they can be effective and impactful for what you're doing. And so sometimes replacing and designing your own audio is like, that's a magical experience right there. But it all starts with recording, and quality recording is the most important element.
Yeah, I remember when actor Chris Pratt on Guardians of the Galaxy, he like shoots a gun at Gamora, right? Yeah, and bubbles come out. And I just love it when I see those things, and I know that there weren't bubbles and there was no bubble sound, but behind the scenes they made all these bubble sounds. It's so great.
So good. Yeah, Foley artists are incredible. Foley is great. I'm amazed. It's like the bone breaking is celery sometimes.
Really?
Yeah.
What? Oh, and then glass in movies, isn't that sugar normally when you watch it?
Yeah, so like if you're if someone breaks some glass over someone's head, it's candy. It's like basically sugar, and it's formed in something. And because like if you hurt someone's glass, like they can really get hurt.
Yeah.
It's not a good thing. But you can buy these like even beer bottles that are sugar candy. So you can like smash and all that kind of stuff for fun things. And I think that like when you are playing with the practical effects and those sound effects, you have to then match the right sound effect, because a breaking of a sugar bottle does not sound like glass.
No, not at all. No. And then we're diving a little bit deeper into more experimental, creative aspects. But
you can play with
to
stuff.
Point out that there is a whole other world that, we could go on for days and days. I'm sure Mike can go on for days and days at least. I can just ask questions. But that said, thank you so much, Mike. You have covered so many things, and I so appreciate you for being here with us today. And thank you all for watching or listening. That is all today for Pep Talks Expand. If you have any questions for Mike, or you want to reach out to him or possibly hire him for your next video or photo editing, you can reach him at his email at mike@betterthanawesome.com. That's MIKE at BETTERTHANAWESOME.com. Thanks again.